afternoon. Thanks for coming. The inspiration for this talk really comes from my frustration and my fascination with smart speakers. When the Alexa first came out, I was not interested in having one in my house at all. I never used my Siri. I had a really hard time connecting with it and using it, so I couldn't imagine what a smart speaker could do for me in my home. But now, I can't imagine what I would do without my Google Home. It is connected with so many smart devices in my house. It connects to my speakers, my lights, my car, even my garage door. But despite the fact that I use it with all these different devices and I use it all around my house, I still get really frustrated. And in fact, I will sometimes admit yelling at my speakers. So how many people here are product developers? Yeah, I'm a product developer myself, and you, like me, are always probably thinking about what can we do to make and improve the next products that we're going to develop. And so for the last 20 years, I'm always looking at the good and the bad of products that I'm always interacting with as a way to inform how I can develop the next great product. In this talk, we'll look at smart speakers, we'll look at what are the challenges and the successes of smart speakers, and we'll also explore different technologies that you can do to combine with voice command technologies. Technologies like machine vision, machine learning, AI, and how these can enhance the interaction that we have with these smart devices. And then we'll also talk about why now is a great time to start developing with these technologies and how we can take these technologies, integrate them into the next wave of smart devices. My name is Torres. I work at Synapse. It's a product development firm, and I work with our clients to create products which will transform their businesses. So with that, let's start. So smart speakers. The title of my talk might suggest that I'm a little bit down on smart speakers, but the reality is it's just the opposite. Like I said, I find them fascinating. There are two important things that I think we should take away positive from smart speakers. One, they have proliferated and they are ubiquitous in the smart product space. How many people here have a smart speaker? Yeah, not a surprise. Most of us in this room have one. In fact, I have one in almost every room in my house and in my garage. The only place I probably don't have one is in my bathroom. There's been an explosion of these devices out and around and in the marketplace. Not only are there a number of different ones of them out there under different brands, they just have sold incredibly. So in 2018, 20 million devices of Echoes were sold, 100 million devices of Amazon or Alexa Inside were sold, and in the last year, the sales of speakers alone have grown by, smart speakers alone have grown by 40%. This is a tremendous market, it's ripe, and there's a lot of opportunity in this space. The other important thing to recognize about smart speakers is how they have really transformed how people interact with digital media. So instead of having to stare at a device or a computer, we can now just speak, and it's much more natural. This natural interaction allows us to have much more compelling and intuitive interactions to control these devices, to work with these devices, and that is, in a lot of ways, why I believe these devices have exploded in popularity and why they will continue to be important to us. Now, when we look at the opportunities in smart devices, we really have to recognize what are the challenges. And I think we can all admit that there are a lot of challenges here, right? So how many people have had frustrated interactions with their devices, right? As many people who have said they have these devices, every single one of us has had a frustrated interaction. And that's also not a surprise because these devices we have more human interaction with them. Because we speak to them, we think that they should understand us and interact with us in a way that is more human. But the reality is they are still just computers processing what we're saying in a way that they only really understand the content of our words. And what kind of what kind of frustrations or challenges or frustrating interactions have people had with these devices? Like what kinds of things are difficult? Yeah.
So we actually have multiple devices in our house. We have Google Home, we have an Echo, and then we have the normal.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so we've also have different wake words, and so I found myself at home actually going like, Alexa, I'm like, no wait, Echo, no wait, Google Home, like, okay, Google.
Yeah.
So I have one of those moments where I'm trying to figure out what device is connected to what, or
Exactly.
what device can do what.
Yeah, so wake words and having so many different devices and knowing which one you're trying to connect to. Are there any other challenges that people have?
Yeah, along those same lines, like latency. Like sometimes you're talking and then it says, "What do you need?" So you think you're supposed to finish your first sentence, but then you're interrupted. So then
it takes
latency in response.
Right. It takes a really long time for it to figure out what you're actually saying, where you're just asking it what time it is. So maybe it didn't quite understand you. Some of the other things that I have are that it just doesn't even get what I'm saying, and so it says, "I'm sorry, I don't know how to do that at this time." Or I'll ask it to play a song and I get a "It's Raining Tacos" song instead of the Rihanna song that I actually wanted. So it's not actually understanding me, right? But you want it to, and that's why it's so frustrating, because humans understand each other with some of just very simple voice interactions. So what's really missing here, and I think we talked about this, or I touched on this a little bit, is that the computer is really only understanding the content of the words that you're saying. What it's processing is really just taking the words that you're saying and essentially just putting it on a command line. It's not really there isn't much more that it's doing around that. And what it's missing, what we humans do, is we really can understand what you're saying because we understand intent. Even if we can't completely hear each other, we can look at all of the other things around the situation that we're a part of and figure it out. We can look at the context, things that we might be moving or moving our hands or pointing to, the room that we may be in, the time of day. We use the logic around, have I had this interaction before? And these are all of the things that some of these smart devices don't do as well, and that's why we get really frustrated. So when we look at this, when we look at smart devices, it's interesting to think about what kind of technologies can we use in combination with voice command in order to make these experiences more compelling, more engaging, to move away from some of this frustration that we have. And that's really the premise of the talk, that I'm not trying to say we need to move away from voice. What we need to do is combine voice with some other technologies which are really becoming ready for development. And this is what I believe is the next wave of smart devices. So in my home, like I said, I have a number of different of these smart devices. What's been great about these devices is that my daughter has more accessibility to a lot of the devices and the computing power that we have in our home. She doesn't necessarily have to pull up a computer or be on a phone or an iPad in order to engage with the devices that we have. So she can take control of the environment and the house that we have set up. So she can ask for songs that she likes. She can ask for the weather and the time and turn on certain lights or set the light color around her room when it's time to go to sleep or when it's time to wake up. And that's not something that she needs to do by opening up a computer. But sometimes I also notice that when she's trying to talk, so one of the things she does every day in the mornings is ask the weather because she wants to know what she should wear that day. And she does it every single day. But half the time I would say the computer or our Google Home does not get what she's saying because she doesn't necessarily use the right syntax in order to ask the question, right? So she doesn't do the wake word first, or she doesn't put the phrasing quite right, and then it gets it wrong half the time. But let's look at a scenario where we pull in some technologies that could be useful in this particular case beyond just the voice to enhance what the system is actually hearing and seeing from her. So if you could use gaze tracking and gesture recognition, then it could see that she is looking at the device, and so she wouldn't have to actually say, "Hey Google," and then it would wake. So you could have gaze, wake on gaze here, and that would know that she is talking to it. And then if she wanted to know the weather, maybe what she could do is just point to the window or look out the window, and it would also track where she is looking or what gesture she is making in order to understand that what she wants to know is the weather. If she wanted to turn on the light, she could point to the light, maybe say light to be clear and differentiate, and then raise her hand in order to turn on the light, or raise her hand in order to point to a speaker and raise the volume on the speaker. And in this way, you can see that technologies that are out there can be used in combination with the voice and the smart devices that we already have. So now let's extend this smart living room to a smart home scenario. And what I like about this idea of including other technologies in these devices along with voice commands is really that you can start to extend the interaction of these devices from being directed at a device to really directed at an environment. So in this case, what if we had facial recognition, and then we could look at how to differentiate between the different users in a room or in a house. So in this case, you might be able to identify the dad, the mom, and the child. And if you apply that to a system that you already have, then you might have an interaction which looks like this. So for example, if we had this system set up, my husband came home and he liked to listen to music, loud music, and he was the first person home, the system would recognize that it was my husband coming in, and it would turn on the music that he liked to play, it would turn the volume up loud, and it would play a song off his playlist, probably something like Radiohead. And then when I came in, it would see and recognize my face. It would also use some type of sentiment analysis to understand what my mood was. So if I was sad, maybe it would turn down the music and play something a little bit more calming. If I was happy, then maybe it might play and recognize that I wanted to play something maybe off our shared dance list, right? Maybe something like the Beastie Boys or MIA. And then if my daughter came in the room, it would recognize and see that she had come in the room, and then it would make sure that it didn't play, the next song it didn't play was Drake. So in this way, you can see that these types of technologies can really extend how smart devices, how we interact with smart devices, not only how we interact directly with these smart devices, but how we interact with our environment in order for these devices to sense and understand what we need in the moments that we'd like to use them. So extending this idea and this thought about how we can use these technologies to improve and enhance the everyday spaces that we occupy. One area that would be really interesting to incorporate these kinds of smart technologies is really in the office space. And I don't know if anyone else has had this experience, but I find going into a conference room incredibly frustrating. There's so much technology that you're trying to control and use. I think this area is a place that's really ripe for using enhanced voice and other technologies for smart environments. So you can imagine in an office setting, in an office environment, you could be able to control cameras by pointing and saying, focus on this whiteboard, or it could sense and identify different users in the room to automatically take notes and assign them to different people. You could also have it set up once it identifies what user is coming into the room, exactly what the preferences that user has in order to run a meeting, or what times of day or repeat meetings that are happening, and set the room up in general for these kinds of meetings. And then finally, one other place that I think would be interesting to look at is really in specialized work areas where having these improved natural interfaces would help how we accomplish our tasks. So in the heavy industrial and in the medical are both areas where I believe are areas that are ripe for integrating these kinds of technologies. So in the automotive space or in the heavy industrial, it would be great if people could interact using voice and then get commands back and have different tools and parts presented to them based on what they're doing and what they need to accomplish, and so that they don't have to lose focus on what they're doing. They don't have to take off gloves, and they can continue to reduce the cognitive load needed to interact with more traditional devices. Same thing in the medical space, and especially in surgery, where you might want to have the surgeon have access to different information or take notes, or have specialized pieces of equipment come in by knowing and being smart about what is going on, both with the surgeon and the other people in the room. Maybe a lot of these ideas that I talked about now are ones that people have heard of already. Maybe you're thinking to yourself, well, these are things that we've been talking about for the last 10 or 15 years, so what's your point? And in fact, this reminds me of a demonstration that I saw when I was walking down MIT's Infinite Corridor. It's the longest hallway in MIT, and they had this face tracking technology where it would see all these people walking down, and it would recognize where a face was, and then it would use sentiment analysis in order to determine whether it was a happy face or a sad face. And on the side was an aggregate score of all the people that had walked by, and they were using it in order to take a pulse on how the students were feeling. And this is something that I saw about 10 or 15 years ago, actually probably closer to 15 years ago. So yeah, a lot of these things have been around for a while, but the reality is a lot of these technologies are on the verge of being ripe for integration into real products. So the time to develop with these products is really now. And when I look at technology, I think of technology as having three distinct life cycles. First, you have the creation phase, and that's really what I'm talking about with that example of what I saw at MIT, that there's a lot of research and development that's going on. These technologies, if they really are truly cutting edge, can take 5 to 20 plus years in order to develop. Then there's the productization phase, where these technologies are ready for integration into a product, and if you can find just the right market, just the right place to integrate them into, you can really change and enhance what your product and brand really is. And then there's commercial phase, where you take that design and you make it so that it can be scalable into production. And for product developers like myself, productization is really the sweet spot of this kind of work. It's really this place where, again, like I said, if you can marry user need with a great product market fit, and you understand this technology and can incorporate it into just the right product, you really do have this potential to transform what these products can do and what you can do within your marketplace. As I've mentioned before, there are starting to be a lot more smart products and smart devices out in this world. As a designer, as a developer, I'm always looking at what can we do next? How can we even improve the most traditional of devices? And as I was talking about before with voice and voice command, there are lots of opportunities still to incorporate custom voice into a lot of these devices. Going beyond speakers and beyond smart speakers, we can start to look at how might we integrate voice and voice command into other products that we might see in our world. And so really there are 4 main ways in which you can integrate voice into your devices. 2 of those ways that I have here on the left are really smart speaker integration and smart speaker platform. And those are really leveraging the work that or the systems that Google and Amazon and others have already built. So you can either create your device so that it interfaces with smart speakers that are already out there, or you can turn your device into a smart speaker. And then on the other side, you can do something that is much more custom, which is to create your own cloud and your own interface for smart speaker and smart speaker processing, or you can also do embedded UI. In this way, in all of these cases, integrating them with other technologies that I've mentioned, like the machine vision and machine learning, greatly enhances what you can do with the devices that you design with voice command. The one thing I wanted to do before we wrap up is really talk about the reason why I believe now is the right time to develop with these technologies that I mentioned. There are two real technology trends that are really driving the availability of components which will help us integrate these technologies into products that we have. The first is mobile devices. In mobile devices are getting more powerful, and they're creating and having higher computing power, and continuing to get smaller and smaller. As this happens, processors that we will need, advanced processing systems that we will need in order to incorporate some of these technologies that I mentioned, are getting cheaper and more readily available. On the other side, we have automated vehicles and all of the sensing technologies that are being developed in order to make these possible. Technologies like LiDAR, radar, advanced camera systems, all of these are also getting smaller and cheaper, and this is also driving our ability to be able to incorporate some of these technologies that we discussed into systems that I believe we'll want to develop. So finally, the big takeaway here is that there are a number of technologies that are really becoming available that we can use to incorporate into our smart systems. By marrying these technologies with voice command, we can create more compelling smart product systems. My ask of you all out here who are product developers is really to think about what kinds of products you can create where you can develop a more compelling and more intuitive and more natural user interface to help shape and drive innovation within your products and in your brands. Find me, talk to me. I love hearing about new breakthrough ideas. I love talking with people about things that they may be considering. Thanks. If anyone has questions, we do have a little bit of time, or you can just find me later.
So was there a large incidence of seasonal affective disorder in MIT in that hallway? Did you notice?
You know what? I think it was mostly around. End of the quarter, so tests and end of project, and there was really a difference. There was the bar on the side did move up and down in a significant way. Yeah, and I will admit that I was the person who was always trying to test that system. So sometimes I would go in and I just be sad, and then other times I would just jump around and loop around and try to like pump it up. So yeah, it did a pretty good job. Yeah.
So when you were talking about frustrations towards the beginning, I actually don't have any smart speakers in my life, but I often house sit or I stay at places that have them, and so the learning curve feels steeper because I'm not using, it's not customized to me and I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah.
How do you see some of these technologies approaching the infrequent user?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. So one of the things I was thinking about, because I live in San Francisco, so I came here and I'm staying at this hotel, and one of the experiences that I had and I thought that these kinds of technologies would really help, was really when I walked into the room and all the lights were dark and I couldn't, I didn't know where any of the light switches were. So I was thinking that if you had a system where you could say, turn on that light and point to that light and then lift up your finger, it would be really useful. And so there's not necessarily anything that the system needs to learn about your voice if it actually has great gesture recognition. So now, there is a push to improve how voice is recognized. So natural language processing is continually improving. In fact, Amazon announced, I think it was last week, that they had a frustration meter or frustration feedback that they were going to start testing, but that's still in development. That's going to be something that they roll out in 2020, and they're only going to beta it on their music piece. So that's going to take a while. So you can continue to work on the natural language processing part of it, but if you incorporate these other technologies, maybe we can get there quicker. And I think especially what you're saying in these places or in these situations where where the system doesn't have enough time to learn, maybe having two different technologies working at the same time, you can improve how it actually responds. Yeah.
Are there people working on this for the uncommon user? Say people that are disabled or using, like you mentioned, saying they could see somebody raising a light, so someone who couldn't speak, maybe using sign language to communicate with these things.
Yeah.
Is there anybody working on that, doing things?
I don't know specifically, but I was trying to touch on this a little bit when I was talking about my daughter. And thinking about how she has access to a broader system of devices, which she might not necessarily have if she's not great at navigating a smart touchpad or even the keyboard on my computer. And I think you can extend that to other people who have more challenges around accessibility, like like the elderly. So I was also thinking about even my mother-in-law who's pretty good at using different pieces of technology, would benefit because she could say, call up, hey, let me call up my granddaughter, or I want to turn on that light, and then she doesn't have to actually get up, or she doesn't know exactly what it means to have syntax around voice commands that you're actually doing. And with your question about people with different disabilities, I don't know that anyone is specifically looking at it, but I do think that these technologies do have the opportunity to help with that. So, if you can't move and you can use gaze detection technology, and I think that is a lot of, they do have some systems like that, but to make that more commercialized, I think that's the place that we're trying to go, and that's probably a place where people can look at to see how these kinds of things can be implemented. Any other questions? Awesome. Well, thanks you guys. Thanks for taking the time to be here and listen to some of the things, and also participating. I appreciate that. Yeah. Have a good day.